A sighting of an unidentified flying object. Encounter of the second kind. Physical evidence of a UFO landing. Encounter of the third kind. Sighting of alien life forms. You are about to learn the startling truth surrounding the abductions of hundreds of innocent people by someone or something not of this world.
Good evening. I'm Roddy McDowall, your host for Encounters of the Fourth Kind, a report on communion. For the next 60 minutes, we're going to take an in-depth look into the world of the unknown. Occurrences that are making us ask a lot of questions about what seemingly has been hovering in our skies and making some very unusual visits to the human race and planet Earth. And keep in mind, what you are about to see in the next hour is not some old rerun of The Twilight Zone or a fabricated story from director Steven Spielberg. What you're about to see is real, and in some cases, frighteningly real. Author Whitley Strieber was a successful writer, living a normal life with his wife and child, until the impossible happened to him.
All of a sudden, in the middle of the night of December the 26th, 1985, these small beings just trooped into the bedroom and carried me out of the room, into the woods. I went up into the air after I'd been sitting in a little circle in the woods with them for a few minutes. I ended up in a small gray room where they performed various physical intrusions, I would say, including putting a needle into the side of my head.
It was this unusual experience, and many more like them, that led Strieber to write the best-selling book Communion and to open to a mass public the story that he wanted to share with others. Now, tonight, you will meet Whitley and his family and hear how these strange occurrences continue to haunt the Striebers' lives. But that is only the beginning. We have also invited some experts in the study of UFO phenomenon to join us here in the studio to reveal that there's more to this UFO subject than the US government would care to reveal. Yeah, but first, what happens when you've had one of these experiences? What do you do? Who do you call? A good place to start would be with an organization such as MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network. The MUFON network's main job is to investigate reported sightings of UFO sightings that may only get one line of copy in your local newspaper.
Well, sometimes I may, say, find an article in the local paper where somebody in my neighborhood, say in LA County, has a sighting that I think is interesting or worth looking into. If there are more questions that the paper hasn't answered, I will contact the individual if I can find out who they are and do my own investigation.
Some cases, though, can become extremely complicated and involve devoting a great deal of time to the investigation.
Generally, you know, on a lights in the sky type thing, you should be able to finish that one, say, in maybe 1 or 2 days if it's got any interesting aspects at all. But an abduction case, you might spend or have to spend a month or 2 on it to do all the things, say, that are necessary, the regressions and the analyzing of anything, going back and doing it again, perhaps.
If a UFO investigator is lucky enough to explore an encounter where the witness snapped a few photographs of the sighting, a photo analyst is brought in to determine if the photos are indeed genuine.
There can be a situation where if somebody hands you a photo and you look at it with your naked eye and you can't see all the information that's in it, it doesn't have enough contrast or something like that. If you knew how to look at it, maybe you could see it. For example, if there's a very faint line on the film, you might not be able to see it looking at it straight like this. So you tilt the film flat like that and you hold it in the right light and you rotate it around. And if you can line up that line with your eyeball, then you can see it. Well, now photographic analysis can bring out that line and make it evident to anybody who's looking at it without any trickery, you might say.
For example, take a look at this photo of alien spaceships surrounding this unprotected building. But when you spin the photo around, you discover that the sources are actually rivets reflected from the surface of a wet bridge girder with the building in the background. And could this photo, taken by a passenger on a train, really be an invasion of UFOs into New York City? No, it's only the train car's ceiling lights reflected in the glass window. But here's one that isn't quite so easy to explain.
This is the initial publication of classic UFO photos taken by Farmer Paul Trent in the presence of his wife on May 12th, I believe it was, 1950. He got two photos. First, this one here, showing sort of the bottom of the object, and then this one over here, a side view. And then shortly after this one, within seconds, this object zipped off to the west. One search that would be made immediately for evidence of a hoax, since these lines up here in the photos are wires that ran between the house and the garage. Here's the garage over here, and the house, it can't be seen, but it's just on the right-hand side of the pictures. One could imagine somebody making a little model, tying it to a string, hanging it on the wires, and going out and photographing it. Attempts to do that analysis involved things like computer-aided enhancement. We had the original negatives to work with, and we used computer equipment to scan under this area very carefully, put it on a computer, and then enhance it. What it amounts to is I wasn't able to find any proof that it was a hoax. What I found was a lot of evidence that indicated they were telling the truth, and therefore I conclude that this is a real thing.
When we return, you'll meet two people who have had very different encounter experiences and see how it has changed their lives forever.
I was suddenly awakened. It was like bolting out of sleep. You know how you have a bad dream and suddenly you're awake. This is what it was, is my adrenaline was rushing, my heart rate was up, and I looked above me and there was this being.
UFOs are not a new subject. Reports of strange objects hovering in the skies can be traced back as far as Roman times. However, it wasn't until the 1960s that stories of alien abductions began to surface. One of the first and most prominent cases was that of Barney and Betty Hill, who in 1961, while traveling back to their New Hampshire home, could not account for where they had been for several hours on their trip. It was only later, through a series of hypnotic sessions, that they learned they were taken aboard an alien spaceship. Since then, thousands of other people have come forward with similar amazing tales, stories like that of Deanna Dubé.
I was born with this congenital birth defect, and what it was is my heart was twice the normal shape and size. The left ventricle was larger than the right, and it gave the appearance of a sock-like shape, so it took up half the size of my chest. I had two relatives that died of the same defect, and my longevity span wasn't, projected very well. They said that it would be doubtful if I lived to my 20s. Well, during the time I was about 12, they gave me, or they had me go under a testing period to see if there was anything that could be done for my heart. And in the middle of this testing period, I woke up in the night, and I saw this being standing over me, a tall, androgynous-looking entity, and he told me not to be afraid, that he was there to help me and he would heal my heart. And then he placed his hands over my chest, and I felt this pressure come, and that's all I remembered. The next morning I woke up with minor chest pains. My mom took me back to the doctors who were testing me, and they took x-rays and found that my heart had shrunk to normal shape and size, that it had totally contorted itself into a way that medical science cannot explain.
The fact that something happened to Deanna is evident from the shape of her heart in her x-rays, x-rays that have the medical community baffled.
The doctors they look at it, and one doctor said, for all intents and purposes, it looks like a totally different heart in the same body. They don't know how or what happened to me. I mean, they can't explain it. It's just something that no one can explain.
Deanna does realize just how strange and yet fortunate this encounter proved. But as to why her and not someone else is not as easy to grasp.
I really feel for the people who may be watching this and who have life-threatening illnesses, who pray for a miracle, pray for things to happen. I don't know why I was lucky enough. I can only be thankful to whoever, the universe or whatever, that I was. And I wish that everyone could be fortunate enough to have a miracle like this in their lives.
Certainly one of the most intriguing cases of UFO abductions belongs to Betty Andreasson. Betty's story, like so many of these cases, began with only a memory of seeing an unusual light in the sky.
Well, I had conscious memory of a certain amount of the 1967 encounter. And I saw an article in a local newspaper put in by Dr. J. Allen Hynek's organization. And they were requesting any information concerning UFOs. And I thought, well, maybe that reddish-orange light had something to do with UFOs. I knew very little about the subject.
What happened to Betty was revealed through a long series of hypnotic sessions. It was through these sessions that Betty began to discover that she had had contact with alien beings throughout her childhood.
This was when I was 13 years old. It took place in Westminster, Massachusetts. It was in the backyard of my home. And I was going up into the woods, up some wooden steps my father had made, and I looked off to the right-hand side of me, and when I did, I saw it looked like a moon, but it was getting bigger and bigger and coming closer and closer to me. That's the only conscious memory I had of it at this time. And then under regressive hypnosis, I found out that I had been picked up by a craft at that time.
But that wasn't the end of Betty's experiences with the beings. 17 years later, they returned, and this time, they visited her home.
They told me that they needed knowledge tried by fire, and the only thing I could think of that was knowledge tried by fire was the Bible. And so we went into the living room, and I saw my mother and my children just sitting there in a state of suspended animation.
As Betty made her way outside and into the spacecraft, she had little idea of what awaited her.
The only part of the experience I didn't care for was the needles that the beings used on me. They said that they had to measure me and physically measure me rather than examine me. When they did, they thrust a needle into my left nostril up into my head, and I felt it break through. It was very painful.
Betty's amazing story can be read in the books The Andreasson Affair and The Andreasson Affair Phase 2. Unfortunately, the story hasn't ended there for Betty. Bob Luca, Betty's husband, believes both he and Betty are continually being monitored by unusual flying objects. Only this time, it might be from our own government.
I couldn't help but notice that these aircraft were all black. They were totally unmarked. They showed no numbers whatsoever, and they flew at extremely low altitudes, all of which are illegal. It got to a point where even some of our neighbors were documenting these flights. So we thought, well, maybe it could be coincidence, maybe we're just in a flight path. But within a year, we moved to another home in Cheshire, Connecticut. Within 2 days of the time we moved to Cheshire, Connecticut, these flights of helicopters started to come over our house, even did figure eights at altitudes sometimes less than 200 feet.
Could these mysterious black helicopters be part of the government's plan to keep an eye on Betty and her husband, to stop them from spreading the word about UFO experiences? When we return, we'll be talking with some experts in the UFO field who do believe the U.S. government knows a little more than you might think.
There's three things that I'm absolutely certain of right now. One, the phenomena, the craft is real. Two, the beings are very real. And three, this government has lied to the people of this country for over 40 years. Those three things are absolutely certain.
The UFO phenomenon is an area with a wide range of subject matter, and there are many, many people who have devoted their lives to trying to obtain answers to this unusual topic. Joining me now are 5 of the top people in the field, each with their own specialty. William Mora is the president of the Fair Witness Project, an organization that conducts investigations into these strange events across North America. Bill is also the author of the best-selling book, The Roswell Incident, an investigation into a crashed UFO in Roswell, New Mexico in the 1940s. Dr. Frank Strangers founded the National Investigations Committee on UFOs. Dr. Strangers has been investigating the phenomenon for nearly 40 years and has lectured on the subject throughout the world. Vicky Cooper is the editor of UFO, a bi-monthly magazine devoted entirely to the subject of unidentified flying objects. The magazine is in its 3rd year of publication and is currently available throughout the United States. Dr. Richard Haynes is a former government employee of NASA and is on the National Board for the Fund for UFO Research. Dr. Haynes is also the author of several books on the UFO phenomenon. Ed Conroy is a feature writer for the San Antonio Express-News and has written the book Report on Communion, which takes an in-depth look at Whitley Strieber and the effect his book Communion has had not only on Strieber, but also on the world. Mr. Conroy, let's start with you.
Very well.
How much attention has the book Communion had on the subject of UFOs and abductions?
Well, I think that the effect of Whitley Strieber's book, Communion, is really incalculable in the sense that it has probably had more impact on the general public than any other first-person UFO abduction narrative ever published in English. It has sold over 2 million copies in both hardback and paper. A recent report in the New York Times stated that it's selling 18,000 copies in paper per month currently. And I believe that really the most significant thing that it has done, Roddy, has been to enable people to begin to talk about this, in the sense that I believe that Strieber, because he was a well-known and well-respected author, broke through what I call the respectability barrier.
Dr. Strangers, why have there been so many reports in recent years, so many more about abductions?
I believe the media has gotten a hold of this thing perhaps for the first time, and more people from every walk of life claim that they have been abducted. And my thesis is simply the same as our committee, that if this is true, the United States government owes it to the people to conduct a strict, serious, scientific investigation into the matter to find out exactly what's going on.
Dr. Haynes, you've done a lot of research regarding the abduction victims. Is there a better way to go about this investigation?
Yes, I think there is. First of all, there's a great number of people doing research in this subject who are not trained. Oh. And they are self-taught hypnotists, for instance. And without an understanding of the damage that can be produced...
Are they taken seriously?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
People are in great traumatic conditions after an event like this, and they're looking for any help they can find.
Bill Mora, what prompted you to get involved?
As far as the motivation, I got interested in UFOs back in the 1950s as a student, maintained that interest after getting out of college in the middle 1960s, and got involved in a series of cases of UFO reports in upstate New York where I was working at that time. Specialized work in the area of the United States government and what it knows about this phenomenon.
Do you believe that the government has been covering up?
Well, it's not a belief system. I believe that vanilla tastes better than chocolate. There is very strong evidence that the government is covering up. There is documentary evidence. Documentary evidence in the form of censored documents. In one instance, there was a case that went all the way to the United States Supreme Court against a government agency which was willfully withholding documentation from the public.
I see you nodding in agreement, Ms. Walken.
As a journalist and one who's trying to get straight information to the public about a very bizarre and hard to understand subject, disinformation and the counterintelligence infusion of getting people off the track, and I'm certain that journalists are a part of that, make it very difficult to do my job, getting the right pieces of information, accurate information.
Do you think it's just this nation, or is it other nations?
I absolutely think it's worldwide. And I think we're dealing also with a political espionage game that's right within the UFO field.
Dr. Strangers, I understand that you were contacted by people in Russia recently.
Yes, I received a phone call from the Soviet news agency TASS, and they wanted my point of view as far as the UFO landing outside of Moscow. And the following day, I got a call from the University of Moscow, and the gentleman was quizzing me very, very closely as to how that particular landing related to certain landings in the United States. And he said, do you have any advice? I said, well, if I was in charge of it, I would take each individual witness alone, by himself, individually, question them thoroughly, and then question them collectively, and then draw your bottom line and see what you have.
Dr. Haynes, do you believe that these beings are trying to make specific contact with any of us?
That's posing the question in a very difficult way to answer.
Oh. I've done it again.
Because I'm not yet convinced that we are being visited. I have not yet come to that point of view, and I'm trying to look at the evidence and draw appropriate conclusions. But I think it's premature to say that.
There isn't enough evidence yet.
Not as far as I'm concerned. To quote our friend Carl Sagan, there are billions and billions of planets or star systems that might be capable of supporting life.
Ms. Cooper, can you give us a little background on the Roswell incident?
Well, as brief as I can, I'll try to, but actually Bill is more the expert in that. On July 7th, I believe it was, 1947, a rancher in Roswell, New Mexico, a little town, found some very strange debris that looked to him as if it might be a problem that was beyond his authority. And so he went to the sheriff at Roswell and suggested that it may be, the sheriff did, a military problem. So that he, the sheriff in turn, went to military authorities. The Army Air Force subsequently came by. Would you like to take it from here, Bill?
It was a physical, you wrote the book,
Yes.
was a physical evidence.
There is some military documentation to suggest that this occurred. In fact, the very first press release that was put out by the Army Air Force at Roswell on the 7th of July, 1947, stated unequivocally that the Air Force had, in fact, recovered the wreckage of a flying saucer. That was their words, not mine. And that made world headlines. The next day, General R.M. Ramey of the 8th Air Force, on orders from the Pentagon, countermanded the story, said it was all a big mistake, that it had been nothing more than a misidentified weather device. The man who gave that story to the press, the adjutant to General Ramey, General Dubose, still living today and a man in his 80s, has stated to us that the whole weather device story was nothing more than a fabrication designed to get the press off of their backs.
Were beings actually seen at that incident?
According to witnesses, there were bodies found on the ground. 4 bodies.
Mr. Conroy, as a newspaper man, do you suppose one of the reasons the government is covering this up is that they're afraid the public won't be able to handle it?
Well, naturally, I think the thing that needs to be pointed out, however, is that there is a lot of cooperation in the cover-up from the press itself, in the sense that there is a tremendous fear among professional journalists to cover stories of recognizable importance, shall we say, against attaching themselves in any way whatsoever to a subject that has so much ridicule associated with it. And there is still a general flippant attitude among many of my colleagues towards this subject. And it's really, I think, based much on fears of losing their class status as serious journalists. And so I think that we ourselves bear much of the responsibility for the problem.
I want to thank all of you very much for sharing your thoughts with all of us. It's been intriguing. I've loved it. And I want to wish you all the best of luck as you continue to search out your answers on this phenomenon. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
And when we return, you'll get a first-hand look at the circumstances surrounding the amazing story in the book Communion. The story behind Whitley Strieber and his book Communion is certainly as frightening as it is interesting. However, what many people don't realize is that the area where Strieber's cabin is located has been a hotspot for UFO sightings for years.
Dr. J. Allen Hynek was the world's foremost authority on the UFO phenomena. He investigated this case personally with me. Dr. Hynek considered this the most important case in the history of UFO research. Why? Because there were so many quality witnesses and so many witnesses.
Philippe Imbrogno's book, Night Siege, details the thousands of reports of strange objects in the skies in the area known as the Hudson Valley, which compromises areas of upstate New York and Connecticut.
The witnesses in the Hudson Valley reported that over the past 5 years, they have been seeing an object which is very well lit, sometimes in the shape of a boomerang, sometimes in the shape of a circle, and it's reported to be the size of a football field or greater.
One eyewitness, however, has provided much more than the standard verbal descriptions to investigators.
This is a video that was made July 24th, 1984 in Brewster, New York at about 10:15 p.m. Here it's moving behind a pine tree and his camera is going out of focus. When it emerges from the other side of the pine tree, the lights have changed. This time there's more of them.
As the Hudson Valley sightings continue into the 90s, certainly one of the most publicized and famous cases belongs to author Whitley Strieber, whose cabin in upstate New York was, and still remains, the setting for one of the most bizarre cases in the files of the unknown. Strieber's encounters with what he calls the visitors first came to the public's attention in the best-selling book Communion, and later its follow-up, Transformation. Both book jackets feature that now familiar face.
Throughout the world, there is a certain type of face, a being that's seen again and again and again, with a long, thin face and big black eyes. Sometimes the head seemed quite big, as in the Betty Andreasson case. Others, like in my case, they seem smaller and the beings are taller. But that basic configuration, that basic sort of non-human configuration, seems to be repeated again and again and again in experiences all over the world.
Dr. John Gliedman is a psychologist in New York City who has talked with and examined dozens of abduction victims, including Whitley Strieber.
The one thing that I believe is that Whitley has had intense, complex, and immensely scary experiences, the ones that he's described. What exactly has been going on? As I say, I lack, well, I have to sound like a computer, insufficient data.
The book Communion is about much more than the beings. It also profiles Whitley and his family fighting to keep their sanity under some pretty bizarre circumstances.
This is ridiculous. They were small, bluish skin, and there were others. Long, thin faces and big eyes. And this is the tough part. They did not appear to be human.
People think that I must have been very upset when Whitley told me that he had met strange, non-human beings, maybe from a UFO. Well, actually I was quite relieved, because before that we'd been having an awfully hard time and he was always unhappy and very grouchy and very moody. So when he told me that this is what was causing his problems, I was very relieved. It was a relief that it wasn't me. I mean, this was something in our relationship, so I was actually happy to hear it.
A common thread among abduction victims is that often the victim's child may also have had the same experience, and in the Strieber household, this proved to be the case.
I was sleeping, and suddenly these lights came, a big bright light came in my room. And sometimes my dad comes in to see how I'm doing in the middle of the night, but he doesn't bring in the searchlight, so I'm sleeping, and I get scared. I think it's a burglar or something, so I pull the covers over my head and sink down. And then something pulls it down, and I see the face that's on Communion.
The cabin and its grounds, where most of these unusual events continue to take place, were open for the Encounters of the Fourth Kind film crew, with Mr. Strieber serving as host.
When they come here, we often hear a sound immediately above the house that will come across into this area. And myself and a number of other people have seen things hanging over this deck or hanging in an immediate little clearing in the front yard, very small things, but quite large ones sometimes hanging over the deck. In December of 1985, when the visitors first took me, they carried me down through these woods, which I remember very vividly, to a clearing not too far from here, where I have since built a stone circle that I and the group of people who've had experiences here go to meditate at night.
The strange occurrences outside the Strieber cabin can only be compared to what happened inside.
But this is where I was sleeping on the night of December the 26th, 1985, when the visitors came in from the door across the room, and the next thing I knew, I was being literally carried out of the room in a state of paralysis.
When we return, we'll go behind the scenes for the making of the film Communion, with its star Christopher Walken.
I said to Whitley the other day that I had never had such an experience, or really anything, including deja vu. It's not something that happens to me. And I said that I'd never had anything like that. And he looked at me very seriously and he said, well, you're about to.
Strange visitors from another planet have long been a part of Hollywood's motion pictures. Pictures dating from as far back as the silent era through the campy saucer movies of the 1950s to the spectacular special effects of Close Encounters of the Third Kind have all left their mark on movie audiences throughout the years. But with the film Communion, Hollywood chose not to tell a fictional story, but one based on fact. When the film version of Strieber's best-selling book went before the cameras in June of 1988, those involved with making the picture knew that this was to be more than a movie about little green men from outer space.
Those other films were fantasies, and Whitley is, this is a true story. That's what makes this picture different. It's a true story, and it really examines the psychological side of what will happen to human beings if and when they encounter intelligent non-humans.
After Mora convinced Strieber that his story should be told on the big screen, the two formed their own production company and set about finding the actors who would play the two pivotal roles. Selected to play Whitley was Academy Award winner Christopher Walken. Walken, whose gritty work in The Deer Hunter earned him an Oscar, quickly adapted himself to stepping into the shoes of the famous writer.
The good thing for me here is that I like to work a lot, and I took a job, and you know, I hope for the best always, but in this case it turned out to be very inventive, which I'm grateful for, and Whitley is responsible for that because he was kind of like a good parent, you know, he let the bird fly.
Equally as important as the role of Whitley was the question as to who would play Anne Strieber, Whitley's wife. To fill this role, the director looked to actress Lindsay Krause, an Academy Award nominee for her role in Places of the Heart.
And another interesting thing about Lindsay is that she was very proud to be playing a wife. In other words, she was very keen on showing that there's a value in keeping the family together, and that even though it looked as if her husband was going completely off the rails with the most cockamamie story she's ever heard, being abducted by little green and blue men, she still had faith in the marriage and in the family.
You're going to go back in that woman's office. We're going to find out what's wrong with you, or we're not going to have any marriage left.
I'm sitting up. I'm sitting.
My shoes.
Yeah. I'm sitting. So, you know, lighten up. Crazy women.
Like the rest of the book, Strieber insisted the recreation of the beings be as close as possible to what he saw in real life. Special effects whiz Mike McCracken was assigned the task of creating the unusual beings.
Whitley had a series of illustrations developed And from this, we scaled up from those, and so that what we have is accurate to within a ½ inch in terms of the height and the size. The movements and so on are also very accurate, or as accurate as it's possible to do with current technology. The colors and so on are very, very close to what Whitley saw. In none of these is there too much movement, I mean, in terms of their face and so on. On the blue people, there is a certain amount of movement. They move in an odd way, and that their face, there's kind of a, Whitley says that there's kind of a gravity feeling. They have kind of a grim quality about them.
And for those actors inside the costumes, it sometimes proved a long day.
Yeah, hi-ho, it's off to work I go. Boy.
Getting into the costumes was only the beginning of their problems. Once in, they sometimes were required to stay in the outfits for a period of up to 12 hours. This, coupled with working on a hot smoking set and trying to gracefully abduct Christopher Walken from his bed, proved to be a real challenge for the little people. Take after take was shot to allow Philippe and the editors a wide choice to use to convey this integral part of the film. McCracken's work was still not done, however. The most important visitor still had to be designed. Because it would be impossible to fit a human into the skinny body of this being, McCracken had to figure out a different way for the beings to move.
What we did then is go back to some of the original ways of making films, which are actually seem to be low-tech, but are very appropriate for the circumstance, which namely just wires, flying them with wires. It creates problems filmically in terms of hiding the wires and so on, but for this, because it was very carefully controlled and so on, it just worked great.
And so what did Mr. Strieber think of Mr. McCracken's final creations?
When he saw the communion figure for the first time and saw it moving, it was like suddenly his face just went white. He had a shocked look on his face. And it took him, I sense that it took him like the rest of the day to recover from this. So it was that there was a kind of trauma, even in seeing the reproduction of the figure.
Strieber believes there might be more to the being's face than what appears to the naked eye, a possibility that is explored with some thought-provoking scenes in the film. Ultimately, though, Communion, the film, is more than just a look at the uninvited guests visiting the Strieber household.
So the film is very much about a family under pressure and how the family sticks together under the stress of these incredible events. So the story is about a family, and that's dramatized, that's come up very well. It's not a special effects picture. It's much more a picture about human emotions, and it's really a psychological thriller about someone who thinks they're going crazy.
When Encounters of the Fourth Kind returns, we'll once again visit the Strieber cabin to examine a bizarre incident that was shared by 9 other people at the cabin in May of 1988. And through hypnotic regression with those people, we'll find out what really happened that eventful night.
Well, it was wonderful because we woke up upstairs and we heard them all talking. And when we came down, they'd been talking for hours. It was just magical. It was like coming in right after a miracle.
This is the couch where a reporter was sleeping last May of 1988. When the visitors came into this room, there were 2 other people in the room at the same time. They were all simultaneously awakened by the ruckus and the noise. As my son says, the visitors are noisy when they're around here. They certainly don't creep around. They couldn't move, these people, and they all had various experiences with the visitors right here in this room.
Joining the Strieber family that May was a host of friends, including Raven Dana, Dora Ruffner, and Colleen Langley. Also invited along were several reporters, including newspaper reporter Ed Conroy, and a reporter we'll call Mark, who chose not to talk to us about his experiences.
If people knew what Mark had experienced here, that it was this person, his career would be ruined. And you got a guy's career on the line. He can't show up here and go public. I think it's a crying shame that he can't, because he had a beautiful, beautiful thing happen to him.
But others were willing to talk.
The fellow who had been sleeping, it was like a fold-out couch, and I was on a cot next to him. He sat up very abruptly, and he said, Did you see that, or did you hear that? And at that moment, this field broke, and I could move. Up until that time, I was just totally paralyzed. But I could move, and I said to him, well, yes, I heard, I heard the voices.
What he described was of also waking up, hearing that garbled voice and footsteps, as though something was approaching the foot of his bed. And then he experienced paralysis. He couldn't move. He was fully conscious, and he was very annoyed because he had wanted validation. He had asked for validation, and here it was, but he couldn't see them.
To determine if there was more to the story than what the witnesses could consciously remember, hypnotist Fred Max, who had taken Betty Andreasen through her hypnotic regressions, was called upon to hypnotize the cabin visitors of May 1988.
I do regressions. I see people who have had UFO encounters, people who wish to remember events previous in their life. And for these people, we call back that period of time, because everything we've done is still in our head. And it's a matter of guiding that person back to that point in time.
As the regressions began, it was evident that more had happened that night in May than was previously thought.
Tell me what you're feeling.
Fear.
Why?
Because something stands behind me and doesn't want me to move.
You seeing anything else? Seeing the stone circle. Okay. And what is that? Stone circle is a little Stonehenge behind the cabin.
I feel a lot of fear, and I also feel this really exquisite feeling. It's incredible.
Relax more. What do you say we backtrack a little? Just relax. I want you to distance yourself from that feeling. They feel they have been abducted. They may have been abducted. I'm reasonably comfortable they're not fabricating stories. And the similarities are intriguing.
Something unusual happened at the Strieber cabin that night, but what was revealed in the regressive sessions appeared to be only the tip of the iceberg. So, the production crew of Encounters of the Fourth Kind waited with cameras in hand to try and capture the elusive visitors on tape. When the sun rose the following morning, the Encounters TV crew was disappointed to find nothing but black darkness on the videotape that ran throughout the entire night while they slept. The beings were nowhere to be seen. Or were they?
A very small, about maybe 4 feet high being with very round, very dark eyes came through the window. And the most interesting thing was that there was no real fear, just at first a jolt of shock, but I felt tremendous rapport with the being who raised his hand, his right hand. And I felt the weight lift just slightly from my body. I kind of propped myself up on my arm, and I also lifted my hand, and we touched palms.
What happened at the Strieber house that night? A dream? An elaborate stunt put on by Whitley Strieber? Or the truth? When we return, we will try to answer those questions.
You know, it's no secret in this that something happened in here last night. But you have no physical validation. All you have is a roll of film that's totally black with a few funny noises on it. Big deal. So what am I to say? Except that you personally, as a human being, know something happened, but you can't validate it.
What has happened to the Strieber family and to thousands of people who've had similar experiences may never be completely accepted by the human race until the beings are ready to make themselves fully known. Meanwhile, the rest of us can only keep wondering, waiting, and hoping for that definitive answer to the question, are we alone? Until then, I'm Roddy McDowall. Good night.